The top 10 worst amateur writing mistakes, in my opinion. Number 1, the hero only has one flaw. And by flaw, I mean they have glasses, or they're too smart. Those are not flaws. That's just window dressing on a Mary Sue. You see, I think real people aren't really collections of strengths and flaws. Hear me out. We're made up of our choices. Some days we make good choices and don't rear end the slow driver in front of you. And some days we make bad choices and end up with a $10,000 fine and a suspended license. The choices that you make at any given moment depend on a large number of variables, like your childhood, whether or not you've been to therapy, whether you just got fired or won the lottery. I don't really think people consistently make the same bad choices at every opportunity until you just magically realize that friendship is the meaning of life. And then the book ends and you're suddenly fixed after that. A lot of new writers focus so heavily on the flaw that they make a linear track from flawed character to fixed at the end. And that is not realistic. So, when crafting characters, focus on motivation and not a collection of flaws and strengths. Number 2, starting every scene with description. This might just be a pet peeve, but I don't think it is. I see a lot of new writers start every scene as if it's the opening prologue from an epic fantasy from 1910. And then I dread the start of every new chapter because I know it'll just be a brick of description. It doesn't need to be there. Too many words. Avoid this. But when I'm writing, I try to make a conscious effort to vary how each scene starts. Sometimes I use narrative, sometimes dialogue, sometimes description, sometimes internal narrative. I also try to keep my word bricks few and far between. To tell if you are word bricking, you can kind of just zoom out of your document and then squint at it to check if your paragraphs are all the same size. You don't want them to all be the same size. And you don't want them to be in bricks. Try to vary them. Number 3, white room syndrome. This is sort of the opposite of number 2, where there aren't enough sensory details for your reader to understand where the scene is taking place, thus the white room. Personally, this is one of my most common mistakes. Usually happens when the setting is someplace that's very familiar to you, or just very familiar to people in general, like a kitchen or a classroom. And as a writer, you don't really feel the need to describe it because you think everyone can just picture it as it is. And you don't want to bog down the story with unnecessary description, so you decide to just skip it. A quick fix for this is to move your scene to an interesting location. So if it's currently in a kitchen, why not set it on a broken down train or at a playground at night? Number 4. So, if your story is suffering from white room syndrome, it's likely that you have dialogue that goes nowhere. Hi, how are you doing? I'm fine. How are you? Good. Good. Stop doing that. That interaction is so awkward in real life that when I see it in a story, my eyes glaze over to avoid secondhand embarrassment. Then I skip ahead a few paragraphs to pretend it never even happened. Your dialogue needs to have a purpose in the scene. If 2 people are talking, we assume they've greeted each other in some way. So unless they're doing something really interesting, like yodeling hello, then we don't really need to see it. Number 5, secondary characters with no personality of their own. Think of your best friend. Would you consider them a synthetic android that only wakes up when you text them and lives to support your every dream? If so, I'm scared. If not, adjust your secondary characters accordingly. Number 6, every character has the same sense of humor. Oh, you're sarcastic and self-deprecating too? That's so funny because so am I, and so is my dad, and so is the bus driver, and so is my 2nd grade gym teacher from 2 decades ago. That is not how life works. It is uncomfortable to read about it in a story because it kind of starts to feel like it's the author's sense of humor, and they're just trying to aggressively tell you a story and say, hey, this story is funny, pay attention. And you realize that these aren't actually characters in this story. This is just the author putting on different hats. In real life, you're lucky if there's one funny person in the room. And then everybody is trying to compete with their own separate senses of humor. Everybody's trying to get the same laughs. It's uncomfortable. Maybe that's why people don't put that in their books. So, if you have to include snarky one-liners in your story, that's fine, but give them to one specific character. Let the other characters have either no sense of humor or a different sense of humor. Number 7, forgetting to use all 5 senses. So many books use only sight, and the only sound is dialogue, and even that is just small talk, pleasantries, and exposition. I challenge you to take your favorite scene in your novel and rewrite it using all 5 senses except sight. The 5 senses are sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. In case you didn't know. Taste doesn't have to be food. Smells can be so potent they stick on your tongue. Air can be so humid that it condenses on your skin like a cold glass of water. Get creative. Number 8. I had to check to make sure I was holding up. 8. Using too many abstract words. I feel excited about falling in love on the beautiful beach. That sentence is so broad that it has no meaning. It will mean something different to every person who reads it. There's nothing to see, or touch, or smell in that sentence. It'll go in one ear and out the other. In my poetry workshops in college, my professors would always strike out words like this and say, abstract language, use more concrete language. Because what does beautiful even mean? Is the beach covered in shells? Are you on vacation and there are spring breakers everywhere ready to party? Is the sand black? Is it covered in snow? Number 9, using a panoramic view of the setting when you should be using a close-up. So often I see new writers use the same lens for every part of their story. Are you tired of my camera metaphor? Sometimes, to set the scene, you don't need to describe everything from the horizon to your character. It can actually be much more effective to focus on only one small detail in the scene, something that really stands out and will stick in your reader's mind. For example, do we need to know what the trees look like? If there's a man wearing peanut butter pants in the driveway, focus on the peanut butter pants. Number 10, this is kind of a twofer. Either not showing growth for your main character, or not setting up a realistic path for growth. So the story ends with a massive sudden change, and no real person would ever actually go through. Refer to number 1.